Well, welcome everybody to season 1, episode, I think it's 16 of this year. And I am meeting with Miles today. And I always start with a dad joke. And here's the dad joke I have for the day. I tried to teach my dog how to dance, but he had 2 left feet.
And 2 right feet.
And, oh, yeah, there's that part. Okay, Miles, most of the people that I've had interviews with here as my guests, I've known them to some degree. And I just had a chance to meet you 2 days ago.
Yeah.
So I don't know you very well. So we're starting on a different tack. I'm going to have you sort of talk about yourself, introduce yourself, and say stuff like that. And then we'll get into some conversations.
Fantastic.
All right. So the mic is yours for right now.
Well, I guess I'll start with a little bit of what I do now, and then if you'd like me to share where I've come from, happy to do that too.
Okay.
I have a functional medicine practice called Medicine with Heart, and that's in Lakewood, Colorado. And we help people struggling with chronic and complex health issues, everywhere from gut issues to thyroid to hormones to complex issues like autoimmunity, Lyme disease, mold illness. And we also help people who are looking to optimize their function, to engage in longevity, anti-aging. So that's a big part of what I do. I also have an institute that trains other providers in functional medicine. And that came out of working with these complex cases, providers asking, well, how do you deal with these things? And so we have a training institute as well.
Phil, just tell me a little bit about the institute.
Okay.
Just like how it works, because I've learned it's a very unique and different. People who have institutes have very different ideas about what an institute is. So I'm interested to hear what yours is.
Yeah, ours, it's for providers. So I recognize that a lot of providers are very busy and wanting to learn, but also needing that learning to be very practical and efficient. So I essentially we've designed the courses in the Institute in the way that I would have liked to have learned functional medicine. So they're online.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So and that wasn't how I initially designed it though. I initially designed it like the other courses that are out there, where we have a module on the gut and a module on the immune system and a module on the liver. But what I realized is, how do you treat the gut? Well, you have to look at symptoms and signs and diagnoses. You have to do lab tests, and there are specific tests that you would do for some people and not others. So what I decided when we revamped the Institute is to have the modules be based on a test, because that's implementable. So rather than a gut module, it's a SIBO breath testing module. And we go over what is a SIBO breath test, who might you test for that, how would you interpret that test, what are some of the interventions that might help that test to normalize, when do you retest, how do you retest, what do you do if the retest shows it's still positive, what do you do if someone gets better but then regresses and it recurs, what kinds of diet and lifestyle might be helpful, what aren't so helpful, what's the hype out there and the myths, what are the things that actually deliver clinical results, what does the research say, where does the clinical experience differ from the research, and then what are some advanced strategies for those non-responders, how to deal with this. So it's a little more hands-on, practical, test by tests, and then we'll go over a stool test, and then we'll go over things like food sensitivities testing, all within the realm of a gut, but rather than a gut module, we go test by test and walk people through how do you introduce this into your practice.
Is there a case study approach to use cases for your?
Yeah, so the pre-recorded modules are teaching and training modules where people have a video and then a low stakes quiz, and then they'll post a reflection in the community. Next video, low stakes quiz question in the community. At the end of the module, there's a case study that they're going and answering what they would do for that case study. And that's the pre-recorded part. But then the lives, we have a community where people post cases.
Okay. Okay.
And so they post their cases, they screenshot labs, they say, hey, we've got a 58-year-old female struggling with these hormonal imbalances and bone density issues and fatigue and brain fog. What do we do? Here are our initial labs. Here are some things that we've done so far. Here's how they've responded or not responded. And then we have asynchronous dialogue on the community about it. And then we have a live every month where we discuss those things in more of a live context. So all the lives and the community are really centered around mostly cases, sometimes questions, mostly cases. And the pre-recorded is teaching and training around the labs. But of course, where the most value comes is how do we apply this to real cases?
Wow. Okay, that is very interesting. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How did it get the name functional medicine? Why is it called functional medicine? And I know I'm not the first person who's asked you this.
A lot of the history of medicine has been around structure. It's really been around what are the structures in the body and how do we influence those structures with medications and surgical procedures. So a lot of it is based on structural abnormalities. If you're going to get a diagnosis, a lot of those diagnoses are talking about changes in the structure. Alzheimer's is degeneration in the brain. If we look at cardiovascular disease, it's changes in the endothelium, changes in the pressure dynamics. But the function has not gotten as much attention in medicine. So what happened is a fellow by the name of Jeffrey Bland many years ago decided that he would really focus on function and see if the structures would naturally change when focused on the function of the body. And what he discovered is that, in a sense, structure often will follow function. And if we can intervene on the functional level, that the structure might actually change. So rather than the emphasis, for example, if blood cholesterol is high, rather than the emphasis of let's change the structure of how the body makes cholesterol and reduce the ability for the body to make cholesterol, the goal was how do we change the function of the underlying issues that might lead to the overproduction of cholesterol. Are there infections? Are there toxins? Are there gut microbiome changes? And if we change the microbiome in the gut, do we actually see cholesterol in the blood shift? Do we see heart disease metrics improve? It became a lot of diet and lifestyle supplements and still some medications, but from a different perspective on the medications.
Well, that's a very effective way to describe the function. You know, it's like function, I guess, is a vague enough word that it's like, well, what all does that mean? And like my personal example would be, I had a trapped nerve between my C6 and my C7, and it was agony. It was absolute agony. And I go to a orthopedist, and they give me some physical therapy exercises and some opioid-based pain, which neither thing helped one single bit. And this probably isn't functional medicine, but in my mind, it sort of is like, I went to see an acupuncturist, and the acupuncturist is actually what resolved the issue, because it wasn't like, well, let's reduce the pressure on this. The nerve actually has the ability to wend itself around a different way. How can we help encourage that nerve to go a different pathway rather than, the orthopedist told me, you'll have to live with this your entire life. I think you're just a drug seeker. I mean, I was really insulted.
Wow.
I was really angry because I was in agony and I didn't want the opioids. I don't like what opioids do to me. And I was so insulted, but man, the acupuncture saved my life, basically.
Yeah, I would say that traditional Chinese medicine may be one of the older functional medicine in a sense, not necessarily what people think of today, but it looks at the interconnected dynamics between different areas. And in Chinese medicine, you'll see that they'll treat the liver for something that's in your neck. There's this interesting
Right.
way of encouraging the body to function differently and
Right.
then seeing the structure change. So I do think
Right.
that it's in that realm.
Okay. Very good. Huh. Well, so where does a person go to school to get their functional medicine degree? Where do you
Yeah, it does.
I know
Yeah,
there
it's
there
not.
probably are some that are really well known and some
Yeah.
that are, more boutique type or esoteric or something, but just tell me some of the story of the education about functional medicine.
Functional medicine, really, it's actually not its own degree, although there are some schools starting functional medicine graduate programs now. But historically, it's really actually been a postgraduate certification where providers of any type, so whether they're medical doctors, doctors of osteopathy, physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, acupuncturists, chiropractors, anyone who's a clinician
Mm-hmm.
who already has a license and a degree
Mm-hmm.
can then take a functional medicine certification to go on top of that and start to practice functional medicine.
So there's a board certification kind of thing, a board that
It's not exactly a board, but there are certification programs
Mm-hmm.
that certify in functional medicine. It hasn't gotten to the point of having its own board certification. There are board certifications in lifestyle medicine. That's getting into the realm
Mm-hmm.
of functional medicine, but it's actually a certification. And that certification is something that is a little bit vague. You don't actually know when someone's doing functional medicine how they've been trained, and unfortunately and fortunately, there's less rigidity. It allows for more flexibility in the way that providers practice functional medicine, but it also means if you're going to a functional medicine provider, you don't know if they did a weekend training from a supplement company that said, oh, now you're doing functional medicine, or if they did a full 8-month-long, year-long, 3-year-long certification program. Our certification program is 2 years long, but sometimes you don't know how long people have been training.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head as a really interesting thing, because my criticism of, not homeopath,
Naturopaths?
of regular, just traditional,
Conventional.
yeah, is they're very rigid.
Yeah,
There's
the
a very-
allopathic medical
and
model.
I've actually been clinical faculty at the School of Medicine at CU, and I taught psychiatry for first-year medical students. And they tried to, the psychiatry, I really appreciated what they did, because instead of having a psychiatry module where they were good, it was attached to pediatrics, it was attached to cardiology, it was attached,
Mhm.
in that way. And so it was an attempt to infuse that particular approach with what some psychiatric principles would be, including interview skills, which I think is another thing that doctors often don't do that great, is their interview skills, where they get to know who the person really is and their relationship to their symptoms that they have. So the rigidity is a problem, but then what you're doing is also addressing, well, when it's not really rigid, then you really don't know what, charlatans can come in. There are people that don't have much training at all, and there's no way to distinguish that. So it just is a lifelong thing. I mean, it's not like there's ever going to be some real resolution. If functional medicine practitioners have some, board of certification, they're going to lose something probably.
Yeah, that may be common. It may have its advantages and it may have its disadvantages as well.
Right.
And, it's a field. It's a very fascinating field of study, and I think that there is some sophistication in the field of study presently. There's also flexibility, and I do think that as it develops further, it'll have good and bad elements of becoming maybe more constrained, but maybe also having higher standards for who gets to call themselves functional medicine providers.
Well, what's your journey through this? How did you fill us in a little?
Yeah. So my dad growing up, he was a medical doctor. He taught at the medical school because he also had his master's in public health. And so he taught in the public health department, and he was really passionate about population-based public health.
Mm.
He founded the Rural Health Office in Tucson, Arizona, where I'm from. And that really was a mission to help to take mobile clinics, send them out to rural areas where people did not have good access to even basic
Mm-hmm.
medical care checkups, and give people some checkups and try to figure out if they were heading towards diabetes or
Mm-hmm.
hypertension or other things. And it really made a big difference. And then
That's really a remarkable accomplishment.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah. So he was able to get grant funding. He was able to get these mobile clinics. But what he started to realize is that there was a big gap, especially at that time. There was a gap where people were below the poverty level, but they were, for various reasons, ineligible for publicly funded healthcare. And he wanted to bridge that gap. So he went into politics. He became a state legislator first and then a state senator after that. But even in the legislature and in the Senate, he couldn't get that bill passed to bridge that gap. So he ended up doing an initiative called the Healthy Arizona Initiative. The idea was to take tobacco and lottery tax money, put it into a pool, and make that pool available to people who are below the poverty line in income but ineligible for publicly funded
Mm-hmm.
healthcare, and give
Which is
them
a
healthcare.
huge group of people.
Yeah. So the goal was to give them healthcare. So I'm sitting there as a kid, and we're all these volunteers coming in and out of the house at all times, and we're stamping envelopes. We're walking door to door. We're getting signatures. I remember I was sitting, this is Tucson, Arizona, right?
Mm-hmm.
Summer heat, over 100 out. I'm dripping sweat. We're in the car, and we're going to go knock on a stranger's door and ask them for a signature. And I say, Dad, why are we doing this? It's not pleasant. It's not fun.
Right.
Why are we doing this? And he's explaining to me how important this is to get this healthcare to these people. And I'm like, but why are we doing it? Like, you have all these volunteers. And he's like, son, if we're going to ask other people to do this, we need to be willing to do it ourselves too. And it taught me an important lesson in the willingness to be in the trenches with people, especially volunteers who are volunteering to help, not just sending them out on these sort of remedial or unpleasant tasks, but doing it together, doing it in community, doing it in a way that really builds a sense of we're doing something important here.
So your father was a mentor.
He was.
Very much so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm impressed with that.
Yeah.
He really had a mission in mind, and he put his shoulder to it.
Yeah.
And he helped you to understand something that, like, I don't know if the right word is noblesse oblige, but it's kind of like, for those for whom much is given, much is expected. And I think that that's something that was a part of that. And then, of course, there's this interesting thing we found out about each other, that your mom had her PhD in social work, and she was a professor at Arizona State University, which is one of the best social work schools in the country. And I have my PhD in social work. I went to Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, and I was clinical faculty at the School of Medicine and was adjunct faculty at the University of Denver some, but I did not really go the academic route. I went the clinical route.
Yeah.
But I thought, isn't that interesting? Out of all these people, we were at this party, and that's where I just ran into you. And all these people, here's this other guy, his mother has a PhD, and it's not that common for PhDs in clinical social work or social work. I thought that was interesting. So, but your mom tell us what she did too, because I made me believe that she was also a mentor to you. And other than just a mom, there's something different about that as mentorship as well.
Yeah, I mean, some interesting things that both my mom and dad decided to go to the Peace Corps and spend 2 years in. They were in Uganda and they were in Peru. My dad focused on tropical medicine. My mom focused on education and social work. And that, I mean, just to me, that's such a service. It speaks highly of a person's willingness to.
Was this before you were born?
Before I was born.
Okay.
Yeah. But of course, the remnants of that, the things they had brought back from, one of the things they brought back from Peru was an ocelot.
Really? You had an ocelot as a pet?
Not when I was alive, but we had the picture of the ocelot on the wall from the Desert Museum, because at some point the ocelot became too big and was donated to the Desert Museum. But in those days, I guess you could bring an ocelot back. So the story is that that they were in Peru and they walked into this restaurant to get a lunch. And my dad sees this wild cat in a cage, a baby ocelot in a cage. And he goes to the staff and he says, "Excuse me, but what is this wild cat doing in this cage?" And they said, "Oh, well, that was the owner. He's a hunter. And he had gotten this cat, but he just died in a hunting accident. And we don't really know what to do with this cat." And my dad said, "Well, do you want me to take it off your hands for you?" And they said, "Yes, we'd appreciate that because we really don't know what to do." So my mom and dad were raising this baby ocelot while they were there. And they also didn't know what to do with it there. So they brought it back to the States when they came back to the States. And then
But they wanted
eventually,
to save the ocelot.
they did.
Yeah.
They did. And they did. And they donated it to the museum. So now I think the descendants of the ocelot are in the Desert Museum. And we have this picture on the wall.
Interesting.
So
that's a great story.
And my mom, she's the kind of woman who, even after she retired from more than 30 years as a professor of social work, she went to Zambia for 2 years. That was her retirement idea, is she'll go to Zambia and she'll help start social work programs there. Mm-hmm. And she was deep into understanding the social work system, the foster care system. And when two teenage women, two teenagers were in the foster care system and not getting any homes, mm-hmm. Her response to that was, "Let's take them in." There was no plan to do this, but she knew they weren't going to be housed and they were going to be sitting in a place that wasn't good for them. And she offered to bring them in. Later, their two younger sisters came and their brother came. So we had 5 biologically related foster siblings that came in when I was about 13. And so that's another representation of the kind of woman that she was. And in her off time after work, she'd run Women Confronting Racism groups, and she'd run Coalition for Arizonans Against the Death Penalty, and she'd be writing letters to the editor, always active, always involved in the community, even to the very end. In her last years, her calendar was still full of Zoom appointments. She was still advocating for grandparents raising grandchildren, and very, very involved in the community.
She sounds like a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a social activist.
Yeah.
I admire social activists. Both of your parents were
Yeah.
social activists, and they had full hearts.
Yeah.
So you're speaking of your mother in the past tense.
Yep.
And your father, I believe.
Yeah.
So fill me in a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I was 15. I was babysitting for my sister's friend and her daughter. And my sister's much older. She's 15 years older. So.
I remember that story, how much older your siblings are than you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I was babysitting and the phone rings. I get a call, one of those old style big phones on the wall with the curly thing, kind of cream colored, reminded me of.
I remember those well.
Yeah. Reminded me of other times. So I pick up this phone and it's Claudia from church, and she says, "Something's happened. It's your father. You're going to have to go to the hospital." And so he had passed on suddenly and unexpectedly. So I was 15 at the time.
Wow.
Just a few weeks before, we had been looking at cars for my first car. He wanted to help get me my first car, and then he was gone. And it was completely unexpected, complete shock,
Did he
big
have a heart
tragedy.
attack or whatever?
Yeah, it was a sudden fatal arrhythmia. And
Wow.
so that was, and it was interesting because he had top-notch medical training, went to Stanford Medical School. He had his master's in public health from Yale. He had the best of the best training. He was a professor in the public health department, and he was under the care of a cardiologist. There was nothing, he'd even worn a Holter monitor not that long before. There was no indication or sign that it was an issue, except in retrospect. I can look back and see some signs from the functional perspective, but from the conventional perspective, there was nothing there was nothing wrong and there was nothing to be done. And that threw me for a loop. Because I know there were signs of things and there were things to be done, but that wasn't within the paradigm.
I'm seeing the first hints of inspiration for where you're going to head.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt too much with this.
After I had my, grieving process and started to ask these questions of why did this happen? Could it have not happened? Would there have been something that could have prevented this? I knew he was under a lot of stress because he was a state senator. The Healthy Arizona initiative that he was trying to get passed, we'd done all this work. We'd gotten it on the ballot. It gotten voted in. And then the Speaker for the House didn't want it to become law. And so the Speaker put it at the bottom of the pile of things to implement. Every day it was the bottom of the pile. It just never implemented. And eventually it fizzled out, which is kind of that's a strong move to make when the people have voted something in, and for the Speaker for the House to not enact it.
It's a cynical move, I would say.
So I remember my father gathering all the volunteers together and saying, "I'm sorry, but this has fizzled out and we have to do it again." But that was his approach, was we have to do it again, not we've given up. So whole process happened again. Meanwhile, someone at the medical school was putting pressure on the fact that he was a senator and still holding his position with the rural health office and with the university. So he was having to backlog his hours to try to prove to them that he was sufficiently working on that while being a senator, while doing this initiative. There was tremendous stress present.
Well, he was kind of sort of being accused of having undue influence by, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So Arizona politics are not for the faint of heart. I know that for sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
it took him 3 times to even be elected in the first place.
Wow.
But the first I decided stress was important, maybe more so than was getting at least attention at the time. Now I think stress is getting a lot more attention. But I became quickly in my, early, really shortly thereafter, when I was 16, I really became interested in meditation and mindfulness practices and yoga practices.
Who led you there? I know it wasn't one. I mean, you have your own mind and you saw things, but were there people that took you there?
No, there weren't.
Interesting.
I really felt like, to be honest, I really felt like my experience didn't match others around me, and I needed to explain that because for some reason, even in the moment that we got a shuttle out to the hospital and we're walking in the room and seeing my father's body there, I had this strange feeling of being very connected and very at peace, and everyone around me was falling apart. And I think the response from the people around me was that I wasn't grieving. And so I remember one night I was trying to force myself to cry because that was the appropriate response that I saw from everyone around me. But it didn't feel quite right, even though I was really sad and I've cried many times about this situation. It felt like something was happening and opening for me in that moment. I recall going outside. We had an owl who had come to this tree in the days after my father's passing. And I remember just feeling something, some sense of the essence of my father in communing with this owl. And it's a kind of experience that I couldn't explain. It's the kind of experience that my belief system at the time, it just didn't compute. What's happening to me? What is this sense? I have a Christian upbringing, and so there was a sense of, maybe Dad's going to heaven, but what is this owl? What is this experience? It just didn't make sense to my belief system and structure at the time. And I felt that I had to investigate consciousness further and in a different way. So it came
Wow.
out of that experience that I was seeking to understand some things that I couldn't put beliefs and words to. And somehow in my investigation, I was able to figure out that, okay, meditation practices and yoga practices and, Buddhist practices and Taoist practices. For some reason, I started resonating with Eastern practices, mindfulness practices.
So someone somewhere knew what you were going through in a way. There were actually places where you could express yourself and be understood and also learn.
Yeah, I felt like in the people around me at the time were sort of like, do you want to be a part of a grief group? And, do you want to seek counseling? And it sort of didn't feel like that's what I needed.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like I needed to go inward. I felt like I needed to contemplate deeply.
Something was opening up.
Yeah. So my approach was go inward, feel into my body, feel into my emotional expression of what's happening, try to understand myself more rather than seeking a support group or something like that. That was my path.
Well, you didn't exactly say this, but I got the sense that there were some people who were disapproving of your path.
I don't think they were so disapproving. I mean, maybe some were, but my family was incredibly supportive of whatever I wanted to do. And one time I sat down with my mom and, I was asking her about my path because it was a different path than, all my other siblings were Ivy League schools and, my brother a lawyer, my sister a PhD. It was a different, my dad was in medicine, but it was conventional. And so I sat down with my mom and I asked, what do you think about my path and doing this meditation and this yoga and moving? I transferred school and college to Naropa University, founded by a Buddhist monk. And she said, Miles, my wish for you is for you to follow your vocation. It seems that you're doing that. And that's what makes me happy. And so, there was no pressure to follow in my dad's footsteps, to follow in my siblings' footsteps, to go to the, my dad and mom met at Stanford. My brother went to Stanford. I kind of wanted to do that from that perspective of following in their footsteps, but it didn't feel quite like me. And my mom saw that and she respected that.
Where did you start your university?
The University of Arizona. I started at University of Arizona for my first 2 years of college. Yeah.
Okay.
In computer engineering.
That doesn't really surprise me though, actually. Like I see a connection, like probably your brain has that affinity to draw patterns, to figure out patterns.
Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting. And I love the story. It's a very touching story.
Yeah.
Now, your mom then has also passed away.
She has. More recently.
You're an orphan at age.
I am.
I lived to be, how old did I live to be? 67 years old when my first parent died.
Yeah.
And when I think about people your age, it's like, well, yeah, they're adults and everything, but still to lose both parents when you're that young it's a lot.
Yeah. Now I was just last year, I was with my brother. We were at Burning Man. We were at the temple. The temple is a place at Burning Man where people grieve. They think about their loved ones, the people who are no longer with them, and he said to me, we're orphans. And I hadn't even actually thought about that,
No, it's true.
But then he said, and what I'm realizing, for the first time right now he's 13 years older than I am. So he's 53. And he said, I'm realizing for the first time that if someone is lucky enough to live long enough, they're going to be an orphan at some point. And I thought that's interesting.
No, I had that same insight. I know exactly what he means too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it may happen earlier to some than would be desirable, but that it was interesting. It was helpful for us to have that connective moment of we're orphans and we're so fortunate that, we're not, that it didn't happen that we passed on while parenting. That would be devastating for our parents for that to happen.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. it was sort of a macabre race between my sister and my dad because she had multiple myeloma.
Yeah.
And my dad was, well, he died at 93. So and he didn't really have anything much wrong with him until he had a stroke and died. But my sister was getting steadily sicker. So it was sort of like what was really going to happen. But he did end up passing away first.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that happened that way.
Yeah.
What was your mom's death sudden?
No, it was more gradual. She, in her 70s, developed a liver cancer, and that she was pretty stable for a few years. But we knew, of course, that it was progressing towards that something would. It wasn't. We didn't have too many years. I had the
tipping point would occur at some point.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to really prioritize time with her, which was great because we saw that we had limited time left. Then the turn happened pretty quickly after she got a second knee replacement, and then she just never recovered and went quite quickly at that point. But she held on. So in her last days, when we knew that she was passing soon, so I flew out there, and then she was hanging in there until all the foster siblings were able to fly in and arrive. And then she was at home, so we had her at home, and the moment she passed was a moment surrounded by her children, her foster children, and we had lots of members of the community coming and going. It was a very beautiful, sad and beautiful experience.
Wow. Both of your parents' deaths were growth-affirming episodes, really, weren't they?
Yeah.
They took you a place that you hadn't been before, or perhaps, anyway, it made it more real.
Well, it's a concept that I'm passionate about.
Is
of
it?
Post-traumatic growth, that there can be these traumatic experiences that are tragedies. And there's post-traumatic stress, of course, but there's also post-traumatic growth possible. And I feel like I've had the fortune to be able to find some post-traumatic growth out of both of my parents passing, even though there's also clearly stress involved in that too.
Well, you've heard that. It's sort of in a nutshell sort of thing, but if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. And I found that for the traumatic things that have happened in my life, well, I've muscled my way through some things sometimes, but I've come out ahead from having done that. And I feel like I enlarged my openness to the world as a result of that. So,
and for me, it's also this clarification about what's truly important.
Oh, interesting.
That has come out of that, because I think that it was a pivotal moment. Both of those experiences were pivotal moments of how important it is to spend time with people I love, how important it is to not just be in the rat race all the time, be hurried all the time, how important it is to savor moments. I think my brother and I have become much closer. My sister and I have become closer, and sometimes I think my mom, was for a long time the pivotal point where we'd all get together because we'd all go to her. And there was question, when she's not there, are we going to come together? And we are. And it's very close. We're very close.
That is a remarkable accomplishment that your families managed to stay together like that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, before we end, and we're getting close to the time. It goes so fast, I think. Yeah. Isn't it amazing how quick? Do you want to talk about anything where you had to sort of overcome an obstacle that perhaps not unwittingly someone put in your place, but something that you had? I asked you, well, who helped you along your way, in your path that you've taken? Well, you said nobody really helped me. But were there people that you had to overcome?
Lots of people helped me, actually.
No, I knew what you meant, though. It's not like I was saying. But do you have a story to tell about someone who maybe unwittingly made things more difficult for you?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there was a time where there was some question about my path in terms of, um, I think from my family, from other people around me, certain teachers that I had. I don't think there's one person that made it really challenging. Although, I mean, I've had a couple of business partnerships that fell apart, but so those, were, but I had this entrepreneurial spirit. I decided out of college that I'm going to do my own thing, start my own business. I partnered with someone to start a business together, and that, it developed to a certain point and then it didn't work out. And that was a challenge for me, because I thought we were going great and I thought things were going great. And then the way that partnership ended was not great for me.
It can feel like a betrayal sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it did leave me in this place of, do I carry the torch forward and keep trying to do this work on my own? Do I find another business partner? Do I go back to school? And my family, I think, had this pressure of go back to school and get more education and follow a path.
They did, yeah.
And really I was in a 5-day meditation retreat. And here's someone who was a real inspiration to me, as I did meet when I was 22, this man named Master Li Junfeng. And he was a Qigong instructor and a meditation instructor and a real teacher, I'd say, but more than instructor, actually, teacher. And when I first met him, I went to a class and he was teaching these movement practices. And he was saying, he was talking about things that other people had talked about, this unconditional love, this openness, this bliss, this happiness, this sense of completeness.
The numinous.
And I had been, I had gotten a minor in yoga. I had been practicing practices. I had been studying with people. A lot of people were talking about this potential, but a lot of it was this future off potential. And what he did is he said, here's what a movement looks like not in that state. Here's what the same movement looks like in that state. And I got a transmission out of that. I felt it. I realized I don't have to go about hoping that this might happen someday. I can actually access this in myself. So that was internally happening. I was doing my own practices. I was studying with him. I was at a 5-day meditation retreat with him. And I did get the clear message, and it came internally, that I do need to go back to school. But, it wasn't from the perspective of because of family. It was from the perspective of because I want to help people in a way that I believe that more school can support.
Wow.
So that led me to go back to school. But there were some challenging times in there where the business that I thought that was going to work out didn't work out. The partnership didn't work out. I was there struggling financially and trying to figure out how to go about developing my career in a way that I thought was going to develop differently than it did.
Well, this is a good place to end, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. And I want to say, I really admire your ability to express yourself in you're so expressive that I'm just right there with you as you're talking about the experiences you're going through. And that's a gift, I think.
Thank you. I really appreciate the message that you're sharing with the world. I really want these intergenerational bridges to form for common ground. I've had the opportunity to have family members and friends who are of different generations. It's been really enriching for me, and I hope others to have that as well.
Well, thank you for the words of encouragement.
Yeah.
All right.